Welcome back to Pre-Calc Cumulative Review, question 6. Similar to question 5, it's another parametric relationship, no equations. This time we're missing the relationship between y and t. They give us the relationship between x and t and y and x, and we've got to find this middle relationship. At first, it's a little bit confusing, so I'm going to go through how I would do it, show you where I would get confused, and then reset myself. So I'm going to start with a chart like I did for number 5 to try and map out the numerical relationship between t, x, and y. What we're really looking for is this column right here. So first let's try to fill in this. So when t is equal to 0, x is equal to negative 1. T is equal to 1, x is equal to 0. T equal 2, x equal 1. T equal 3, x is still equal to 1. T equals 4, x is still equal to 1. T equals 5, looks like x is equal to 0. T equals 6, we're down to negative 1. T equals 7 and 8, we're at negative 1. Now let's see if we can jump to this graph, find these values of x, and then extract the values of y that match the values of t. So when x is equal to negative 1, actually this graph, I put this in here, that negative 1. This graph doesn't actually tell us the values of x, so we're going to have to guess. So right along this line and this line, we see that x stays exactly the same. It's the same value of x all along here, and then the same value of x all along here. Looking at our chart, that happens right here when x is equal to 1. So my guess is this is the positive side. I'm going to guess that this is x equal 1 right there. And then x is equal to negative 1 along this path for these values right here. So that would probably map to this. We know that eventually x is going to repeat as t goes on. We're going to assume that this is probably going to repeat the pattern because we're told that this path just continuously repeats like this. So x begins, if we're here, we're going to go up in this direction. So my guess is that this point right here corresponds to t equals 2. Why? Well, that's where I encounter my first x equals 1 when t is equal to 2. It stays at 1 at 3, and it stays at 1 for the last time at t equals 4. So before x changes from its value of 1 to something else, I'm going to assume we're already at 4 because that's the last place where we see x equal to 1. Then it goes back to 0. So it makes sense that as it travels along here, then it ends up at x equals 0. So this looks like t equals 5. And it goes back to, it goes now to x equals negative 1 by the time t is equal to 6, which would make sense. If you're here at x equals 0 and start moving this way, you end up at x equals negative 1. So that seems to be negative 1. This would be t equals 6. And as we continue, we can see that x stays negative 1 as t goes to 7 and 8. So this is probably t equals 7. Right here would be t equals 8. And then it's going to repeat. We don't have that part of the graph. Let's go back to 2, t equals 2, and x equals 1 right here. So it looks like before that, so maybe when t was equal to 1, we know that x has to be less than 1 and approach 0. So where x is equal to 0, we can see that t is equal to 1. So this is probably my t equals 1. And then before that, when x was equal to negative 1, t was equal to 0, it makes sense. I probably started right there. So it looks like at t equals 0, we start here, we traverse across, then up, over, and back down to t equals 8, and then the pattern would repeat again. So now that we've got this, and this seems to make sense, we'll try to figure out the values of y. So let's start at t equals 0, x equals 1, negative 1. So we're right here. What's the value of y? Well, we know this is a square, so this is probably y equals negative 1. So y must be negative 1. And then as t goes to 1, x goes to 0. We're right here. Y is still equal to negative 1. T is equal to 2. X goes to 1. However, y is still at negative 1. So we've just gone t equals 2, t equals 1, t equals 2. I'm sorry, t equals 0, t equals 1, t equals 2. Y stays at negative 1. So t equals from 0 to 2, y is negative 1. That would make sense right there. Then as t goes to 3, x stays at 1, but we're moving up along this path, so y must be increasing. I think this is t equals 3. Y is now equal to 0. So t equals 3, y is equal to 0. T equals 4. X is still 1, but y looks like it's moved up to 1. At t equals 5, y stays at 1. T equals 6, y stays at 1. T equals 7, y comes down to 0. T equals 8, we're back to y equals negative 1. So now I've got all the points I need to plot here. So at t equals 3, y is equal to 0. T equals 4, y is equal to 1. T equals 5, y is equal to 1. T equals 6, 1. T equals 7, 0. T equals 8, negative 1. So this would be my best guess at what this graph looks like. And we know it repeats, so it'd probably do this and then repeat, just like this one would repeat. That concludes number 6. Hope that made some sense.